The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to another session of TriTech University. My name's Bill Steppen, and today we're going to go through what to expect when going through a conversion of your data from version 11 of AIMsi to version 12 of AIMsi. We're going to go through some sample data. It's not going to have a whole lot in it, but what I've done is I've kind of put together some examples of what you might expect when going through this conversion routine and what you might want to look into as far as correcting any bad data that you might have from many, many years of using the system. And so that should hopefully help your conversion process go a little bit more smoothly, and that way you can get on version 12 that much faster. So we're going to just go through a few things leading up to that. So before we jump too far into today's outline, I just want to make sure everyone here is comfortable with using the GoToWebinar platform that we are making use of here today. So you should have a GoToWebinar toolbar on your window, and you can minimize that with a little button that looks like a little orange button with a white arrow on it. That should be able to shrink the toolbar out of the way so you get the full screen on what we're going to be covering today. Now, in that toolbar, there is a question and answer box. So if you have any questions at any time, go ahead and type your question into that box. And if you see me glancing over this way, it's me checking to make sure that everything's going smoothly. Little one-man operation that I got going on here. So bear with me. If I don't get to your question immediately, I will do my best to answer them as I go, and of course, hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A if you do have any remaining questions at the end, which is probably pretty likely given the extent of what a conversion routine actually is. So with that being said, let's just talk about what we're going to cover in the next hour. So we're going to go through an overview of what we would anticipate your conversion process to be. And then we're going to consider some important things that you just want to keep in the back of your mind as you're going through these processes. We'll then take a look at a little utility that we've put into version 11 so that you can go in and actually correct any potential problems, hopefully with your data. That's going to be the main scope of today's webinar, and then we'll take a look at how the actual conversion itself goes through. So when it comes to the conversion, first of all, you're going to want to make sure that all aspects of your systems are up to the latest update. Now, as of today, which is 12/10/2018, so December 10th, the date of this webinar live, the latest updates to version 11 are as of 8/2, August 2nd, 2018, and there was a patch to that version which was released on November 15th. And I'll show you how you can check that because it's a little bit different from just checking the latest update. The latest builds for version 12 are 12.0.1.81. And again, I'll show you where you can check that. And then the last build for the converter itself is 12.0.0.62. And that was released yesterday as well, 12/10. So again, just bear that in mind. If you're watching this non-live, if you're watching the recording of this, it's very possible that all of these dates have changed. So you might want to just give us a call into support or check on the member portal if you have any questions on what might be the newest. The newest builds are always at the top of the download page if you have any questions on that. So getting started with anything, of course, we always recommend to back up your data. So make sure you have a backup, make sure it works. The easiest way to make sure your backup works is to just go ahead and try opening it, and hopefully it should open up with no problems. So once you got your data backed up, then we're going to run the version 12 upgrade utility in version 11. That will help prep that data for converting. And then after you've actually run that utility and it's cleaned up your data, we'd recommend backing it up again. And keep both of those backups in case you need to go back at the data pre-cleaning, so to speak, and then, of course, after the cleaning as well. This is in addition to the normal nightly backups that we suggest you be running, and keep those backups archived so that you have access to them if necessary. Once you've got the data cleaned up with the utility, then go ahead and actually do the conversion of version 11 to version 12 into a training copy. Now, if you're not sure how to create that training copy, I'd recommend giving our support team a call, because having that training copy can be really helpful to go in and just play around with the system. Overall, it's not a necessity to have a training copy when we're doing this conversion, because technically when you do the conversion, it's going to wipe out any data that's in the version 12 anyway. So, but just it's good practice, basically. And then play around with your system in both version 12 as well as continue to operate in version 11 just like you normally do. Kind of try and do those side by side if at all possible. And that way you and your staff can get comfortable with working with version 12. And then ultimately, once you are then feel free to rerun that conversion and do it in a live manner that way. And then basically cut version 11 and go 100% with version 12. So now some things to consider as we get going through this. It does not actually remove the data from your version 11 system to do this conversion. So don't worry if you feel like, oh, I can only do this once and then version 11 is going to be shut down and no longer usable. That's not the case. Version 11 will continue to operate just like always, before and after the conversion, but not during. So just bear that in mind. You want to make sure everyone is out of the system while you're doing that conversion. Now, that being said, converting your data into version 12 does wipe out the data that is already in version 12. So just keep that in mind. If you have been doing any customizing of the menus, like you might have been doing if you've been attending our previous webinars here, you would probably want to consider exporting those to make sure that you can import them back in after you've done the conversion. And I'll just cover that really quickly here, probably near the end of today's webinar, so you can be sure that you know how to do that. Now, as I said, no one should be in the system while you're doing these conversions, either version 11 or version 12, hopefully, obviously. And you may wish to convert a backup copy of version 11 while you're doing that first test run, first or second, or how many test runs you're planning on doing. Because technically, because everyone needs to be out of the system when you're doing that conversion, and the conversion could take some time, anywhere from maybe even several hours to a day or more, depending on how much data you have. If we're talking about potentially decades of data, that's going to take some time to convert. So just keep that in mind. So if you do a conversion of a backup copy, then your folks can certainly operate in the live copy while that test run is going about. And of course, hopefully this makes sense that you do not want to do this when you're converting live. You basically want to try and do the conversion going live with version 12 at a time frame when business is more or less shut down, if at all possible. So you might have to do some hand invoicing or potentially even doing some invoicing in a dummy copy of version 11 and then printing those out and redoing them in version 12, again, depending on how much time it seems to take based on your trial conversions. So a few other things here. A full overview of this whole routine can be found on our member portal. There will be a link on the left-hand side when you go in that talks about the version 12 upgrade. Click on that, and that'll take you to the web page that I've got direct linked here, this pre-AIMsi v12 web page. And more than anything else, I want to stress that everyone's copy of AIMsi is going to be unique. So we're going to be covering some things here that hopefully gives a general gist of what to expect, but there's going to be some oddball data sets out there that no one can predict because of whatever happened 16 years ago in a really old copy of AIMsi when someone decided to go in and mess with some categories or do some things with inventory or customers or orders or whatever the case may be, maybe even all the way back to soft music. If some of you guys are still around, I'm sure you are. I saw some really old accounts coming in and checking out this webinar, which is absolutely awesome. Hello, everyone. But without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at the version 11 conversion utility. Now, actually, before I do that, I want to bring up how to check to make sure that you are running the latest version of version 11. So I'm just going to open up a little file browser here, File Explorer. If you're not familiar with this, it's usually found as a little manila file folder in your Windows taskbar. Should be coming up here shortly. So you should be seeing this. But when you go into your AIMsi folder, there will be an AIMsi file. And basically, you want to look at the date that it is modified. Now, if you're not seeing the screen in this fashion, like you see here with everything kind of in a list with the name and the date modified and the type, etc., you can usually use a little view option. And what I'm viewing is I'm viewing things by, where's my view option? Group by, nope. Okay, I lost it. Where is the option to view? All right. Suddenly I seem to have lost it, but here we go. The view option, I'll just do that. You can right click on the space and any white space in there, and you can choose the option for details. And if you use the details option and find your AIMsi application, which you should hopefully be seeing here, you want to see that the date modified is 11/15, just like I said the last patch was. So that'll tell you right off the bat that you're running that latest update and patch. If you're not seeing that date, then you'll want to make sure that you download the latest update and patch and run those on your system. So, and if you have any questions on that, I don't think we'll have time to talk about those today. But if you do have any questions on that, definitely give our support team a call. Some folks have been saying that they've been having some problems running the upgrade utility. I know that there were some things that were fixed in that patch regarding the upgrade utility, Mark. So I would recommend checking that out, making sure that you're on that last update. And some folks have been saying that the signal has been kind of cutting in and out here. I apologize for that. Unfortunately, that's a little bit out of my control. I've shut down everything that isn't necessary for this webinar, but I'm at the mercy of the internet in general, so I do apologize for that. Hopefully, everything's coming through in the recording at least. Wesley is saying that he's already converted. Do you need to continue with this webinar? If you've already converted, Wes, then I would say probably not, in all honesty. You can feel free to check out, and you can always check out the webinar's recording later on if you want. So if anyone else has already converted, you don't really have to check this out unless you wanted to, just to make sure that you weren't missing anything during the conversion. So with that, let's go ahead and check into my version 11 copy here. Wesley's asking where the webinar recordings get posted. Technically, by registering for this webinar, Wesley, you should get a follow-up email that'll have a download link, but I can send you an email too that has a link to all of the recordings later on too. Where is my, there we go. It keeps jumping around on me. So let's go into version 11 here and check out the upgrade utility. So to find this upgrade utility, if you go into your AIMsi version 11 and go up to the help menu and then go to about AIMsi, as I misclick, on the license page, you'll see a little button here that says v12 upgrade utility. And when you click on that, it will open up this v12 upgrade wizard. As we can see, it says here, this will help you walk you through your data cleanup and make sure to clean up any data that is needed to be cleaned up before you want to go about doing the conversion to version 12. It says that this is a scan of the AIMsi database and it will find any problems that might exist. Now, it's not going to technically find all of the potential issues. Like I'm saying, this is kind of a stressor. There will still be some potential problems that this might not find, but this is a general sweep of the things that we have found that can and potentially will crash your conversion. So the first thing it will ask here is if you have been using the lesson module, which version of the lesson module are you running with? Are you running with kind of the classic module, which is the lesson billing and scheduling, or are you running with the newer, what we would have coined the scheduling module, or are you not using either lesson module? And of course, if you're not using the lessons, you would just say none. It doesn't really matter for the purposes of this webinar or really the upgrade wizard in general, but I have been using the lesson billing and scheduling, so I'm going to check mark that. And then we're going to click the next button. And you can see it kind of going through in the upper corner there and potentially finding any problems with some specific data sets. And it will list these out here. And anything that you see in red requires to be fixed prior to moving forward. Anything that's in white should be potentially corrected, but are not necessarily required to be corrected for the purposes of the conversion. And if anything shows up green, then there's no problems at all with that particular data set. So as you can see, I have gone to some lengths to make sure that we have at least one problem with every one of these particular steps. And we're going to go through these in order so we can make sure that you have at least a general understanding of what these problems might be. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about orphaned subcategories. Now, anytime you see that term orphaned, it's how do I describe this? So when we talk about an orphaned subcategory, for example, it's not so much that the subcategory exists and nothing is referencing it. It's actually the opposite of that. So in this particular instance, what an orphan subcategory means is that there is something elsewhere in your data set that is referencing a subcategory that no longer exists. So it's kind of the, in all honesty, the opposite of an orphan subcategory. It is what it is, I suppose, at this point. But what you'll see on any of these steps is a table here of the problem data, and there will be a little option here that you can basically choose a correcting filler, if you will, or redirecting that data to reference something that does exist. So in this particular instance, when we're talking about orphaned inventory subcategories, we can see that it's referencing a category 20 subcategory 1. Now, again, I made this data up, so hopefully your category that it's originally referencing is something more along the lines of an actual inventory category. Now, regardless of what you're seeing on the table here, if you want to kind of get an idea of where you should redirect this data, you can click on this View Detail button that will appear on every screen, and it will bring up where it's finding these missing values, and then you can go from there into a further view option to see what it found that is a problem. So in the case of a subcategory that was orphaned, it's finding an entry in this file called SCSA-DSC. Now, you don't necessarily need to know what these tables actually mean. You can find a copy of our data dictionary for download on our member portal, which does go in and kind of describe what all these different tables mean in plainer English, or at least mostly plain English. For our purposes, we're basically just going to click the View button, and we can see that it's finding some kind of inventory record called test. Hopefully, again, your data will be a little bit more specific than just the data I'm making up. Model number break me because I was having some fun with it. But basically, it's letting us know that it found an item here that needs to be corrected. And the way to go about doing that is you can either choose a new category that you want to direct that product to. In the case of a product like this, that is referencing a subcategory. Sometimes it might be sold data. Sometimes it might be some other files too. Again, everyone's data is going to be unique. But the general gist of fixing it is to choose a replacement category and subcategory. So in this case, I might say that instead of existing in this category with no subcategories, I might instead put it into miscellaneous print, subcategory, classical. And then basically by making those selections, I can then move on to the next step. So you can see in the upper corner there, it says it's replacing that data, and then we move on to the next step in the upgrade wizard. Hopefully that's making sense. So the next element that it's going to come across would be any orphaned categories. So just like the orphaned subcategories, an item or record was referencing a subcategory that no longer exists, the same would hold true for any orphaned categories. One thing I actually just remembered that I wanted to kind of show on that previous step that I didn't, unfortunately, was that you can, if necessary, you can go in to your different maintenance areas and you could technically make adjustments to things like inventory records or inventory categories or vendor records or anything like that as you go along with this process. And by all means, you don't actually have to do this all in one step. For example, if I exit out of this right now and you say, are you sure you want to exit? Progress on completed steps will not be lost. That's an important thing to remember. So let's go ahead and say yes. Now watch what happens if I go back to the upgrade utility and I go ahead and say next. You can see it's going to come up as being green on the orphan subcategories because I've actually gone ahead and fixed that. And now we can kind of keep on moving forward with any other data that we need to correct. So going with next brings us back to the orphaned categories. Same basic premise here. So again, in this case of the orphaned categories, these are inventory categories that have potentially gone missing because they've been deleted or converted or whatever might have happened from many years ago, or maybe even last week, who knows. But you can, again, basically choose a replacement category and category description. So again, if we view the detail, in this case, it's actually coming from the subcategory column, the subcategory table in AIMsi. We can see that there's some kind of test subcategory that's referencing back to that category in this particular instance. Again, your mileage will vary. So we're just going to basically say that this needs to go to, probably we'll put this into a general accessory. And you can see when I come over here, let's see, there we go. It's going to show up with that general accessory. There we go, listed. So we'll go ahead and say next on that. It'll correct that. And then it will carry on with the next phase, which is going to be, in this case, orphaned employees. So again, in this instance, these would be employee records that for whatever reason got deleted. And in this particular instance, you'll notice there are several tables that are showing this missing value. So again, you'll probably see this more often than not than just one table or at a time. You'll probably see something more along the lines of like this, where there's several tables referencing a particular missing record. So we can kind of go in here, we can view whatever the detail might be. In this case, these are invoice records, so referencing that particular missing record and so on and so forth. But this step also introduces a kind of a fix that we've built in the instance of orphaned employees. So you'll notice that there's a little button here that says to create and assign a conversion orphan employee. So in the case of orphaned employee records, obviously these would be handy to have to make sure that you can go back and you can view what is recorded on any given employee from years past. But If we're talking several years ago, let's say well beyond 7 years ago, to the point where probably it's really no longer necessary to be concerned for employee records like sales or anything like that. You can just use this little utility that we have built in that will create and assign these old records to what we're going to call a conversion orphan record. So by clicking proceed with that, you can see it fills in a replacement record ID, and then we would go ahead and say next with that. And it will basically merge all those into a converted record like that. Mark is saying, can you go back in the wizard to look at stuff that has already been done? Probably not, Mark. As you might have seen, technically it skips past any old records that have already been cleaned up. I would say, if nothing else, that would be a good example to go back and actually potentially look at the backup of the data. So, but yeah, I don't think there's really a way of viewing what has been fixed in your current copy. So, but thank you for the question. Now, moving right along, we're talking about orphaned ledger accounts. Now, this is where it might start to get a little tricky, because ledger accounts, not everyone necessarily uses the ledger portion of AIMsi. And you'll notice that this has a new column in here saying that required entries are marked with an REQ in that final column there. So in this particular instance, we could potentially skip past this 12094 in this instance, because it's not necessarily a required thing to be corrected. But there might also be times when ledger does need to be required and fixed to keep on moving forward with that. So again, it's in your best interest, in my opinion, to try and correct as much as possible. So what we can do in this instance is we'll usually look at the matching inventory, or whatever the case is. In this case, it's referencing the categories. So there's a category 1625 in this instance. Again, I just happen to know that because I've been using the system forever and a day. But there is a system category in here that's actually referencing that particular ledger account. And we can either leave that window open, and we could go in and we could actually create that ledger account in the chart of accounts, or we could just choose a replacement ledger. And in that instance, that's where F6 can really come in handy, because then you can just choose the replacement ledger from the listing there. But that's basically how you can go about correcting that. So it'll either switch over the old ledger number to the new ledger number, or you can go into the chart of accounts and you could just create the missing ledger account if you happen to know what it should have been, and you could just create it from onto the chart. Or again, in the instance here, we could just basically skip past it, and you can see how it says you've left some ledger entries empty. Those ledger references will be removed if you continue. Do you want to continue anyway? And because those aren't required, I'm just going to say yes for the purposes of this webinar. But again, I would stress that if they can be fixed at all, I would recommend going ahead and doing that. So the next thing that we're looking at now is orphaned store locations. Now, hopefully this isn't going to be too big of a thing for a lot of folks, but in the case of an orphaned store location, this is what we're when you have had a store account or a store location that has been deleted. And in this particular instance, it's finding a store location 0 somewhere in the data, and it wants to know what that should be. So in this instance, again, we'll check the view detail, and this was an SCCONVND, so this was actually a vendor record of some kind. This is actually our phone notify vendor record, so it's referencing an invalid store location, and we can basically just say that I'm going to put that to our main location, in this instance, our Dubuque location. Again, your mileage can and will vary from step to step, but again, just I want people to mainly catch the gist of what we're doing here. We're finding records that could potentially throw off your conversion, and we're making steps to fix that. So in this instance, I'm just going to move this erroneous entry to the Dubuque location where it probably should have been in the first place. We'll say next on that. Same basic thing with orphaned tax authorities. So just like you might have store locations where you may or may not have been running businesses, or maybe you were using it for a warehouse location or whatever the case may be, tax authorities are where you can keep track of all the different taxes that you might have collected, either for different authorities that you actually owe money to, or just whatever the case may be. In this instance, we're finding in reference here for a location, or basically a tax authority, JC. So that would have been the Johnson County. Again, I just happen to know these things. Again, don't worry too much about the individual details of this webinar. What you're looking to accomplish is just try to figure out where you can go and make these corrections. So we can check out the view here. And in this instance, I would usually probably replace these to I would probably actually go in and create a tax authority. Again, you could do that by going into your general maintenance. In this instance, going to tax authorities, making the adjustment, and then reassociating those in that manner. But I'm just going to, again, proceed with my brain locked up. I apologize. I saw a question come in that was huge. Let me see if I can catch up on questions here. So Sue says, would it be a good idea to delete invoice history older than 10 years old? I don't know if that would be necessarily a good idea. I guess it depends on your definition of a good idea, Sue, but that is something that you could potentially consider. If you're noticing that that all of this junk data that's coming up in this webinar, or in this utility, is past a certain age, and you feel it's best to actually just cut it loose, I'm going to actually drop out of the upgrade wizard to give Sue a little bit, and Sue probably knows what I'm thinking of here. Maybe not everyone does, but in the admin section of version 11, there is a data removal tool that you could potentially make use of that I think Sue is alluding to. So what you could do in maybe some instances, if you feel that you can get by without having data from many, many moons ago, maybe 10 years and older, you can come in and you could say, use this data removal utility to go in and say anything older than, let's say, 1/1 of 1998, so basically 10 years ago and older, would be deleted out of your system. And you can just basically check mark which histories you want to remove in that instance. So again, it's up to you. If you do want to have this data in version 12 to reference, I would probably suggest against this. But one thing, Sue, that I'm now just thinking of that might be useful for you is you could potentially use this data removal tool to clean up a copy for conversion, but you would have your backup that I mentioned at the beginning of this, that you would be archiving, that you could use to go back and potentially reference any old data from that period of time that you just removed. So hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know and I'll try and elaborate on it. And I think we will have some time here for that. But you could also certainly give me a call if there's more questions on that specifically. But yeah, Sue, that is something that I think could potentially work out for you and maybe some others that are checking the webinar out as well. Dennis is saying when he tried a trial conversion a couple months ago, the utility was messing up at the service table and all the entries were being set to all categories and all subcategories. So they were being replaced instead of being a specific category and subcategory. He's wanting to know if this is an issue that's been fixed or if there's a more recent version of the upgrade utility. Quite honestly, I am not privy to that detail. I do know that the latest update to version 11 with that patch did correct some things specific to the upgrade utility itself. So that may have been something that was corrected, especially if you did phone it in, Dennis. I would probably recommend giving our support team a call. And obviously, if you're still doing this in a trial run, I haven't seen anything specifically about it. No one's brought that to my attention, so I'm afraid I can't comment as to whether that specifically was fixed, but I think that it would have been. Obviously, that's a pretty big thing for a lot of our clients. So I'm sure I'm going to go out on a limb and say I'm sure that that was something that was fixed. And if it hasn't been, I'm sure it's on the radar to be fixed. In fact, I'm just going to make a little note to myself to check in on that after we get off the call. So repair table. So I apologize for those watching the recording here, but yeah, I'll check in on that, Dennis, and I'll get back to you. Again, I think it would have been corrected, especially if this was several months ago, but I'll check in on it for you. All right, so carrying on, I'm just going to exit out of this data removal tool. I'm not going to actually run with that. So let's go back and pick up where we left off with the upgrade utility. So again, you can see that as I've been going through and cleaning these up, it's been making some adjustments as we go. So it did not actually correct this new category, subcategory combo here. So let me go ahead and see if I can't get that to stick this time. So we left off at the Orphan Tax Authority. So let's go ahead and make my selection there. And then you can see that this also does have a create and assign a conversion orphan tax authority as well. But I'm just going to roll with replacing it with the Dubuque County, because I know in my instance that I haven't been doing anything with the old Johnson County data, so I don't actually use it. But again, not my data. Your data is what I want you to be focusing on. So the next thing is going to be orphaned workstation. So an orphaned workstation would be a specific computer now that has been using AIMsi, and that workstation's record has been deleted, but there is still some data that's referencing it. So in this instance, we're seeing that there's some data out there referencing a workstation number 2. And you can either, again, have it create a conversion orphan workstation, or we can go in and we can specifically find what detail is referencing it and maybe switch it over to a new workstation if that's necessary. For our purposes here, I'm just going to click the proceed button and have it create a conversion orphan workstation. All right, so moving right along, orphaned customer accounts. This is probably going to be more of what people run into. Is these orphaned customer accounts. Accounts that have had some detail in the history, but the account itself got deleted. So what it would ask for in this instance is if you're going to have it create conversion orphan accounts on behalf of these records, it wants to know which kind of customer type you want them to go into. So in this particular instance, I'm going to say that they're going to be cash customers, and I would proceed with that, and it would go ahead and create replacement customer orphan accounts that would make a home for all of that customer data to live as it gets converted over. Excuse me. So the next thing it's going to check in on is orphaned manufacturers. So a manufacturer record is it's obviously a business that creates things that you sell in your store. So in this instance, I went in and I deleted one of our manufacturer publishers in the data, and it would just want to know, again, if you have a specific manufacturer replacement. Now, manufacturers, it's quite possible that you're going to have a lot of these as well. In prior versions of AIMsi versions, probably all the way back to 4, it was very easy to accidentally replace a manufacturer when you were trying to add one. So you might have a lot of entries on this particular table if you've been using AIMsi for a long time. So what you'll probably be doing is using a lot of replacement manufacturers. So for example, you might have had, let's say, an Alfred, and you already do have maybe an Alfred Publishing, or let's say you're in the gun industry and you had typed in at one point, let's say S&W, and you had actually keyed in a replacement of Smith & Wesson at some point. So you can make those selections and then they'll just convert over with the appropriate replacement manufacturer. In this instance, I'm just going to go ahead and again create a conversion orphan in this instance for the purposes of our webinar. Again, you can always go in and view the detail. You can see that there's a couple of tables that reference this particular manufacturer. That can be helpful if you want to go in and actually create some manufacturers in the manufacturer table. Let's actually do that. I'm gonna show that instead. So I'm going to not use a conversion orphan manufacturer. Instead, I'm going to go into the manufacturer publisher table, and I'm going to show you that what you can technically do. You can see how it actually added that conversion orphan already for me. But I'm going to go ahead and click the add button, and I'm going to go ahead and create an Alfred manufacturer. So I'm going to save that to this list, and now I will have that available, or I should have it available to select. So I might actually have to exit out and go back in and make that selection there. But hopefully that gets you the idea that you can go in at any time and actually create any missing entries and then go back and reference them after the fact, especially in the case where maybe something did get deleted and it didn't get replaced at some point in your just passage of using the system day to day. So the next thing is going to be orphaned vendors. Vendors are who you buy the product from. There has been some confusion over the years about why there's both a manufacturer table and a vendor table. And the long and the short of it is that the manufacturer makes the product and the vendor is who you buy the product from. Sometimes they're the same, but sometimes they're not. And in some cases, you might have multiple vendors that you can buy a product from. Regardless of that, these orphaned vendors, in many cases, are going to be vendors that have been referenced that no longer exist. Now, this is going to be another one of those little tricky ones because you might see here there's a vendor 0 that's being referenced. And in this case, it's coming from the vendor inventory file. So it's actually finding a record here that's referencing just a generic vendor 0, which technically never would have existed. So using this conversion orphan for a vendor 0 could be very helpful in that instance. You can see how it's creating a replacement vendor 1 here for me that it's just going to assign as a conversion orphan for me. So moving right along, the contract defaults. These would be specifically your long-term contract defaults. Now, these would be defaults that, if we take a look in the contract maintenance portion, these would have been defaults in here that had been used at some point, but then the default itself got deleted. That's why we actually have a little option here to deactivate a default if you no longer offer that kind of contract. But regardless, if the contract default itself got deleted, you could either re-add it back into that table and then reference it. In my instance, I'm just going to go ahead and wonder why I can't choose a default. So I'm thinking it's getting confused from my clicking around on things here. So let me try that again. So we're going to go back in and say next. And it's still finding that orphaned category here. So let's try using something else. Let's just try going with band. It didn't give me that grief before in my trial run. So let me see if I can't figure that out. So back to the contract default. It's really not letting me get past that. Okay. So let's just do this. Let's check the detail again. So this is an account. This is actually finding a specific rental contract in this instance that is existing, that the default no longer exists. So why is it not letting me pick that? This is always fun when you get to see me trying to think of things on the fly that did not happen in my trial run here. All right, so trying to remember which one I deleted. I deleted the simple interest rent. So let's just go ahead and re-add that in. And that would have been a simple interest. Just going to try and save this here. There we go. Not sure why it's only showing that one. I'm going to make a note on that too. Now that you've all seen me sweat here on live candid camera. Rental defaults. But you also got to see me try and figure out why that wasn't coming up. So maybe that had been to your benefit. We'll call that Murphy's serendipity. Let's go with that. So we make our selection. And again, these are things that might come up that you're just going to have to take some time and figure out. And that's why you can always come back later after you've had a chance to review things. Selection codes. Now, selection codes, this may or may not be a thing for a lot of you. The whole idea of a selection code in AIMsi is something that you can use to group inventory together regardless of its category or manufacturer or any other kind of status. Now, over the decades, folks have used selection codes to give them some kind of rental status, like is it refurbished? Is it like new? Is it some kind of status within the shop? Is it currently in the service bay? Or all different kinds of things that selection codes have been used for. More recently in the firearms industry, prior to version 12 and our customizable attributes element, we had pinned selection codes to hold caliber information. So this is probably going to be more applicable for our newer customers that are in the gun industry that are using these selection codes for that purpose. Maybe a particular handful of items had referenced a certain caliber, and then that caliber got deleted in favor of a better description, or whatever the case may be. Regardless, the same thing applies. You're basically going to choose a replacement selection code. Now, you'll notice this has an option to remove selection code references for empty rows. So you could either remove the empty ones, and you can see that it will flag that as a way to remove that selection code if you no longer need that selection code. Or you can clear that out if you want to keep it and then go back and make a replacement one. Or you can create a conversion orphan replacement code like we've been kind of seeing throughout the course of the session today. But in our purposes, I'm just going to remove it and we're going to carry right along. And then kind of wrapping things up here, duplicate purchase orders. Now, hopefully this is not a problem, but in the instance that it is, you can see how it's finding a potential couple of purchase orders here that are different because they have different lowercase versus uppercase in the purchase order reference number, but for the purposes of the conversion, they're considered duplicate. So basically, you could come over here and you could give it a replacement purchase order. You can see how it says the following duplicate purchase orders were found. Please enter a replacement PO number. Note that only one instance of each duplicate needs to have a replacement entered. So in other words, one of these can keep its original purchase order number. The other one needs to be replaced. So I might state that, for example, this one needs to be PURCHORD 1002. Just again, something to differentiate one from the other. So I only have to correct one of an instance in this case. Or technically, if there were three that actually all had the same potential purchase order number, then I would have to correct two of them, two out of the three, because one could keep the original instance. And you can see that it finishes up with that upgrade wizard. And again, it'd just be a good idea to go back and rerun it just to make sure that you caught everything. I'm thinking that that category is going to give me some more grief there. For some reason, it's still having problems with that orphan category. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just recreate that category because we're getting near to the end of our session. And I want to make sure that I can show the next couple steps here. So I'm just going to recreate that category 27. It was something. Again, you'll probably spend more time figuring out actual descriptions and stuff like that, but I'm just going to throw something in here to have, and it's letting me know that ledger numbers have not been entered. I'm just going to go ahead and say yes to that. And now we should be able to see, for the purposes of the webinar today, that everything should be coming up green. So now when that happens, you can go ahead and go with the next step of actually doing the conversion. So let me just check any questions that might be coming in. Mark is saying, when these updates happen, will the orphan accounts show up on the standard customer file now, or just in the background as a placeholder? Let me just make sure I'm understanding the question. Will the orphan accounts show up on the standard customer file? I'm assuming these are in the instance of the customer accounts that were potentially orphaned, and if that's the case, then they would be given actual accounts so that that history can be transferred over. If that's not the answer that you were expecting, or if that's not the way I'm supposed to be understanding the question, let me know, Mark. But yeah, they would basically, if we are talking about customer accounts, they would show up in the customer file just like normal, but now they'll have an actual account that they're attached to. So, oh, you're asking, are they all called orphan accounts? They would actually be given that that special, that designation of conversion orphans. So hopefully that helps out there. So the next step would be to actually run the conversion utility. So what we're going to do, I'm going to actually close out of AIMsi. You're going to want to make sure that the software is closed. And then I'm going to actually go ahead and open up my Of course, I had closed my File Explorer. So I'm going to reopen my File Explorer. So you should now be seeing my File Explorer screen. So to run the conversion utility, you would download it just like you download the version 12 download utility. And when you run that v12 converter utility, it'll actually install in your AIMsi v12 file folder. So in AIMsi v12, there will be a new file in here called the AIMsi v11 to v12 data converter. You're going to run that. And I have a copy of AIMsi v12 open, so I'm just going to go ahead and close that too, because you'll want to make sure that all of your instances of AIMsi are closed when this conversion is running. So this is what the screen would look like. You can see that when you open it up, it will come up and say what build it is. Again, like I said, version 0.62 is the newest build here in the case of the conversion utility. It's going to ask where the version 11 database resides, and it specifically is going to be looking for the sc.dbc file. Now, if you have multiple AIMsi version 11 copies floating around like I do, you're going to want to click that open button, and you're going to want to point it to the appropriate AIMsi data folder that has that file. So mine happens to be the data that I do want to convert is in the AIMsi data folder. But if you had a couple of instances like I do, like an AIMsi copy, backup of junk, like I was saying I was playing around with earlier, if you have multiple copies like that, you do want to point it to the data file that you want to convert. As I mentioned, if you're converting this as a test for your first time, you may want to convert one of your backups so that you can continue to run live with version 11 in the meantime while this conversion is going on, so you can kind of gauge not only the length of time it will take, but also so that you're not just sitting there twiddling your thumbs and potentially losing business while the conversion is progressing. But I'm going to go ahead and point it to that sc.dbc. Now, after you make that selection, it will ask over to the right if there are any default values you want to use for records that might not have had links prior to version 12. And you can see there's 4 things it's going to ask: user, location, tax location, and workstation. So there are some instances in version 12 where there are now defaults to these 4 elements that might not have existed in version 11. And you basically just want to choose what you want those defaults to be. So in the case of a user, I'm going to say that it's the default user for my purposes. Basically, it's just who is the default employee where there might not have been one before. The default location, I'm going to choose my Dubuque location. The default tax authority, I'm going to choose my default Dubuque County. And then the workstation, I'm going to point to workstation 1 for our purposes. Now, last but not least, you'll see it's going to ask which version 12 database do we want to convert this into? You're going to have a production option and a training system option. I'm going to do the training system option. Again, that's what I would recommend if you're doing this as a trial run. And when you are ready to go live, then of course you'll want to do this into the actual production, or what we would call the live system. But once you've made those selections, you'll basically say execute, and it will come up with this little mention that says, warning, all data in your version 12 database will be deleted. And actually that does remind me, I do want to point out where you can make a backup of your menu system. So before I lose that, let's go into my version 12 copy here. While I'm waiting for that to open, correct some parchment in my throat. Okay, so assuming that you have been making some menu customizations and you want to make sure you retain those, open this up nice and big so people can see it. In your copy of version 12, if you want to retain that menu data, you can go into your maintenance, general, and both your touchscreen menus and your point of sale menus. And if you had attended the menu webinar, maybe this is a little bit of old hat now, but there is at the bottom of the menu editor this export menu system button. So you want to make sure you click that, and that's going to ask where you want to put that. So in my instance, I'm just going to put it onto my desktop, and I'm going to say this is my touchscreen menus. And I will save that. And what it will do is it will actually create an Excel spreadsheet as well as a file folder with all the necessary data that is necessary for the menus to be re-imported back in. So once that is done, and it shouldn't take too long here. There we go. So then later on, when you go back into AIMsi, you can click the Import Menu System button. It's going to ask you for a name that you want to give it. So we could call this Restored Menus. Or again, if you have a name for it, you could give it a specific name. But then you'll say OK with that, and you'll just point it to that Excel spreadsheet that you had created earlier. And that way they'll get re-imported back in after you've done the conversion. Just a few minutes left here, so I want to make sure that I show how that conversion utility runs. And obviously, this is going to take a lot longer than just a few moments for most of you, but I do want to show what it would look like. So bring this back up here. All right, so again, I'll repoint it to that sc.dbc. I'll make my default selections here. All right. Someone asked what that enable logging checkbox is, and basically, if you're having some problems with your conversion, what will usually happen is support might recommend that you checkmark that enable logging checkbox so that you could send that to them in the event of a conversion crash, and they could potentially use that to try and find where the conversion is hanging or crashing and get back to you with some recommendations on what to fix. But with that said, let's just go ahead and click the execute button. Again, it will say all data will be deleted and replaced. We'll say yes to that. And you've selected to use the training database, but this configuration was not found, of course, because I deleted it. So let me just try this once more. Obviously, in my instance, it doesn't matter because I'm just going to get a whole new one anyway. So let me Third time is a charm. And we'll leave it on production. We'll say execute. We'll say yes. And of course, you're not seeing. Oh, yeah, you are. So you should be seeing it. Basically, it will fly through and show what it's converting. And then it will say it's done. So yeah, obviously that went a lot faster for me than it will for all of you. Even if you've been using the system for just a few months, that will probably take longer than just the few seconds that it took for me. But the important thing is that once that data has been converted, you do want to go into your version 12 and you want to do a comparison of records. And you don't want to just jump. We would strongly recommend that you don't just jump in and use version 12 as your live system when you're doing this conversion for the first time. I would give it a good, at least a few weeks to just make sure that any potential snafus, let's call them, get found and rectified. It never hurts to give our support team a call if you have any questions at all throughout this process. But that has basically been the conversion process. So that utility, that upgrade utility, really is the most important element in this case. Other than that, it's just time and checking that data when you have the opportunity to make sure that everything has come over with no issues. I'm going to bring up my final screen here as soon as I can find where my mouse went off to. Oh boy, there it is. Okay. My computer is really not liking me today. So bring this back up here as far as my slideshow. And while I'm waiting for that to come up, I'm sure there are a bunch of questions coming in. So let me see if I can pick up where we left off. So Dennis had asked about the enable logging checkbox. So hopefully I got that answered. Dennis also is saying, when re-importing menus, would you need to first choose delete entire menu system, or does the import overwrite the existing menus with your same name? Actually, that's a great question. So you would actually not want to delete that. You won't be able to delete it if it's the only menu that is in your system. You'll go ahead and import the new one, or import them back in, but then what you can do after the import is you can basically switch them over to the one that you just imported in, and then at that point you could go in and you could delete the default menus that get created when you load up the AIMsi v12. So let me just bring this up here because I want to make sure everyone can see just the little bit of detail that's on my final slideshow page here as far as where the recordings are, and to make sure that you check that member portal. I've got one more webinar coming up this Thursday, so 2 days from now, covering physical inventory in AIMsi, specifically with version 12. So if you are planning on doing a count of your inventory and you are using version 12, definitely register for that and check that out. As of this time, I don't have any other webinars officially scheduled. There will be no more webinars for the year of 2018, but check our social media regularly. There will be some announcements coming up soon on TriTech University webinars for 2019 and beyond, starting in the first few weeks of January. So look forward to that. So just to wrap up, any other questions that might be coming in? Hopefully, Dennis, that answered your question as far as re-importing those menus. Brett is asking, how do you find the snafus if you don't use it live? And again, Brett, that's where I mentioned that you'll want to try and use both systems side by side. So you'll still use version 11 on the day-to-day basis, but you'll basically have version 12 open at the same time, and you'll basically key your transactions into both systems and then just kind of run your reports as you normally would, basically do everything kind of double posting. I know that's some extra work, but that's what I would recommend. That's what we all recommend here to make sure that everything is on the up and up as far as that data. That's really the best way to make sure that everything that you're using on the daily basis in version 11 has come through and is nominal in version 12. But hopefully that helps out there, Brett. Thank you for the question. Warren was saying that I was in the midst of a long freeze and that I'm back. So again, I apologize for whatever reason is going on with the connection. I'm afraid I'm not able to do too much about that. But there aren't any other questions coming in. I know this is kind of a cluster of a webinar, so I apologize for some of the things that happen there as far as the webinar itself. But again, hopefully the main gist came across as far as what to expect when getting ready for a conversion and how to deal with some of the things that come up. Again, it's going to be unique for everyone's data out there. The most important thing is to just keep an open mind and give our support team a call. We're really here to make sure that everything is going smoothly for you. So the best way we can help out is to give us a call and show us what you're running into so that we can try and help you out through that as best as possible. So the webinar recording will be available probably within the next hour, so keep your email open for that, and give me a shout if there's any other webinars that you wanted to check out, but for whatever reason you don't have the link or the email never came in. And I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you soon.